So we're with Ericka Jones this morning at the HYTT retreat. And one of the newer things about Ericka that I just saw announced yesterday is you are the official Minnesota Yoga and Life.
Oh, thank you.
Big in-person reveal. So we are just really grateful that you're here, and our hearts and our ears are open to what you have to share. So thank you for being here and for being you.
Thank you. Thank you all. It looks so cozy. Shelley gave me a little tour of the house. I hope you all are enjoying it and the sun. So hold on just 2 seconds. Do I have the ability to share my screen?
Let me make sure you do. Okay. Yes.
Okay. All right. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to make you a co-host, Ericka, so that you have whatever rights you want there.
Okay, perfect.
There we go.
All right, so mindful inclusion, as Shelley mentioned, I'll get into a little bit about how this started after introducing myself. So first, who am I and who am I for you? My core values are love, joy, community, connection, and compassion. And I lead with that through everything that I do, through work, through relationships, and those are my 5 core values. As Shelley mentioned, I am from Nebraska. I think it's really important to share the dynamic of who we are, and we'll get into this when we talk about diversity. I am an aunt. I have 3 nieces and 2 nephews. I am from Nebraska, as you can see. That was my first time at this. I lived in Minnesota for 5 years, and I just went to the state fair for the first time, like 2 years ago or 3 years ago, like right before COVID. And of course, as a true Cornhusker and the land of corn, went to get obviously corn on the cob, and then I was done with the state fair. So I was like, okay, I came, I experienced it, I need to leave. So and I love to travel. And those are my parents. I'm also a daughter here again, Nebraska, huge advocate, like love of Nebraska football, Nebraska sports. I went to Kenya with Africa Yoga Project to help lead a teacher training twice. So 2 separate years. The last time I went was literally the month before everything shut down. And then I'm a Lululemon ambassador, and I work full-time in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I've been doing this work for over 14 years now. And these are some of the companies that I've worked for: Target, Abercrombie, where I spent most of my career, currently at Cargill as a global DEI leader. So who are you? We're not going to go into breakout groups, but I want to get to know who you are in the room. So if you want to go around and say your name, a little bit about you, that would really help me get a little bit of context. Well, I'll say this to be more specific. Your name, how long you've been practicing yoga, and how long you've been practicing yoga and where you're from.
Okay. Maybe if you want to start here, Mindy.
Sure. I'm Mindy. I've been practicing yoga, I don't know, somewhere around 10 years, on and off. And I'm from St. Paul, Minnesota. I live in Edina now, but I work with a lot of people in Nebraska. So I have a special warm spot in my heart for Nebraska.
That's great. And if you see me turn my screen off, it's because I also have a cold. So I'm going to blow my nose, and no one needs to see that. So so if it comes off, I'm still listening. Yeah, thank you. And you said you work with a lot of people in Nebraska?
Yeah,
Okay.
In multiple parts of the state.
Oh, nice.
Hi, I'm Jody, and I've been practicing yoga for, I don't know, maybe 15 years off and on, and I'm from Minneapolis.
Thanks, Jody. Can you repeat that a little bit louder?
Sure, yep, practicing for about 15 years off and on, and from Minneapolis.
Chelsea.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Chelsea. I've been practicing for about 15 years and I'm also from Minneapolis.
I'm Leah. I think I've been practicing on and off for probably somewhere around 20 years and originally from Wisconsin.
I am Nicole. I have also been practicing on and off around 20 years, and I live in St. Louis Park. Good morning, I'm Jill. I concur, about 20 years, which says my age, but yes, and I live in Minneapolis.
Maybe let's, Rachel and the couches will go, and then if you, Elliot and Q, you can just walk over when you want and come up. So, yeah.
I'm Rachel. I've been practicing on and off for about 20 years, although I took my first yoga class when I was 16, I think. But I'm not going to say practicing on and off there because it was like a class here and there, nothing consistent. And I'm from Wisconsin originally.
My name's Colette and I have been practicing since 2007. I am now from Minneapolis. I was born on the East Coast, lived for about 7 years on in California and have been here since 1994.
I'm Julia. I've been practicing yoga for about 3 years and I live in Minneapolis, but I'm from Wisconsin.
I'm Lisa, and I'm originally from North Dakota. I'm originally from North Dakota, but I've been in Minnesota longer now, tells you my age. And I've been practicing yoga probably on and off 20 years too. Should I go?
Okay, there's 3 more of us. I'm Dana. Nice to meet you, Ericka. I discovered yoga in 2009. That's when it started. Just kidding. You're all and I am also originally from Minneapolis.
My name is Elliot. I have been practicing yoga for on and off about 15 years, and I'm originally from Wisconsin, but I live in St. Paul.
Good morning, I'm Quint. I've been practicing yoga for about 5 years. I'm originally from Georgia, and I've been in the Minnesota area, the Twin Cities area for about 2 years.
Wonderful.
That's all of us.
That's all of you. Wonderful. All right. Thank you. So before we begin, we're going to do a quick 5-minute meditation. So if you want to put your notebooks beside you, we'll just land in our body and our breath. Bring your hands to the tops of your thighs. Begin to notice your breath. Notice the natural rhythm of your breath. And take an inhale through your nose into your belly, into your chest. Exhale. Again, in through your nose into your belly, into your chest. Exhale. Last inhale through your nose into the belly, into the chest, and let it out. And take a couple of minutes to do a body scan, starting at your feet. Notice the sensations that arise. Notice your shins, your knees. tops of your thighs. Hips. Your navel. And your energetic center. To your heart. Your throat. Your jaw. Your tongue. Your cheeks. Eyes, the space between your eyes. To the crown of your head. Take a breath in and release. Breathe in. Empty out. Last inhale. And exhale. And bring your hands to heart center, palm to palm, and rub your hands. Create some heat. And place your palms and hands over your eyes. When you're ready, slowly remove your hands and bring your awareness back into the space. Welcome back, everyone. Okay, let's get started.
Ericka, as you get started, let me just say one thing about this handout because there's a little mistake, and then I'll give you the whole floor. The copier did something weird, so it should be 2 pages, and on the first page, I through Julia. And this is gonna roughly follow what Ericka's got, so it's just, these are just outline points. The front page should say in just little letters, inclusivity, equanimity, etc. On the back of that, hopefully, or on the second page, you've got ahimsa, satya, and then on a third page or the second page, you should have saucha, but the printer messed up, so looks like gradually it stopped printing full pages. Yeah, so I just want to check in with people. You're going to be missing some, so just follow along with Ericka, and at least you've got something to write on. We'll just call it that, okay? Totally blank. I'm sorry. Okay, thanks, Ericka. Yeah, how are you? I'm sorry.
All right.
Okay, go ahead. We'll figure this out. Thank you.
Great. Yeah. All right. So the promise for our time together today, by the end of our time together, you know, we're going to have some shared language, learn the foundations of inclusion, diversity, belonging, and equity, understand how you can influence your studio through intercultural competency. Actually, we won't have time to go through that. So I may nix that because it's a deeper dive into that, and that takes an hour and a half itself. So I may have to nix that out based on time. Become more consciously aware of the impact and importance of building an inclusive class that cultivates a sense of belonging. Be equipped with the knowledge and confidence to create and be mindfully inclusive on and off the mat. Learn how yoga ethics are essential to holding inclusive spaces. Reflect and inquire about your personal and collective beliefs and practices. So our agenda is the introduction, which we've done, the foundations of DEI, your role in creating inclusive spaces, yoga ethics, and the studio planning. So going through and studying or discussing how do we plan to make the studio more inclusive. Oops. All right, safe space and brave space. So I love having these both on here, the safe space and brave space. As we go through our agenda, I'd like to set a few norms for how we show up and engage. So first, speak your truth. We're going to practice that, Satya. Listen to understand, expect and accept non-closure. So there's going to be a lot of things that you may not have closure on. And that is part of the self-study, the self-inquiry. And it will begin manifesting as some of the concepts or things that you hear begin to integrate. Confidentiality, be willing to fail forward using I statements, be willing to step out of your comfort zone, take space, hold space. So know the intention of what you're saying, and notice and acknowledge your breath. A lot of times when having this discussion, this is why I started with the meditation, that we can begin to get really heightened, especially this day and age when discussing this. So really notice the shift in your breath if it were to shift. So let's begin with like a full group discussion about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Over the next hour or so, we're going to pay attention to how inclusivity really looks like. And for our group discussion, where do you notice strengths in inclusivity and belonging? For like in the yoga space, where do you notice strengths and inclusive and strengths and inclusivity and belonging? In the yoga space. And so anyone can speak up, share.
I've noticed it, at least at Yoga Sanctuary, how all bodies are welcome. Just the language and the openness and empathy of the teachers. So that's a way I've noticed it. Like you're okay as you come.
Okay, great. Anyone else?
I'd add to that one thing I particularly notice is when teachers will introduce themselves or get to know each student that walks into class. And when they make that a point of that every student they ask their name, that's a way that everyone is included. Instead of just greeting students that might be there on a regular basis that they already know.
Yeah, great. And where do you notice areas of growth? So opportunities for growth.
Really light. Like just yoga feels very segregated. From my perspective.
Yeah. And why do you think this work matters? Why do you think it matters to have this discussion of diversity, equity, and inclusion in your teacher training?
I think all bodies bodies should be able to access yoga and feel welcomed in any space, in any community. And especially in a space that's vulnerable. So I think that's really very important.
What was the last part that you said? Can you say that a little louder?
It's a vulnerable space to be in.
Yeah.
When you're practicing yoga, and everyone should feel included and accepted in the space.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing. So as you can see, this is where we're at. This is where the yoga industry, in my opinion, what it looks like. It's not very inclusive when we talk about body types, poses. It's focusing on the asana. This doesn't look very inclusive, and this is typically what you see in marketing images. And this is what we're striving for. A diverse studio, spaces where all feel included. It's equitable, visibly diverse when it comes to race, gender, ableism, balanced with energy and learning. So you can see that there is a balance of energy from sitting to resting, and a space that everyone feels welcome. So this is what we aspire, and this is why this work is really important. So as students and teachers of this practice, we create more space for the full practice of yoga to be welcomed in versus what we typically see. So the foundation, so sharing some set languages, I think it's important. I don't know where all of you are at in your journey, so I really like to ensure that we have some shared language when we're discussing what it means, what things mean. So it may seem really remedial, but I know from my time in doing this work that there's so many different definitions that are out there. And so what is diversity? What does diversity mean to you? What is it? And you all can popcorn and share and say.
Diverse people from all different backgrounds.
Yeah, people from all different backgrounds. Yeah. So diversity is the mix of difference that may make a difference. I think that's the part to really focus on, is emphasizing the difference. We conditionally grew up thinking that different to not highlight the differences, right? So to create this shared commonality, and really the differences are what make a difference. I like to add the definition of diversity. It's what is seen and unseen. Because as you can see, this iceberg layer, when we speak about diversity, we typically focus on the top 4 things about the iceberg: race, ethnicity, gender, and age. Sometimes it would be around physical ability because we can see that, but we focus on that top part of the iceberg on what we can see. So when people say, oh, we need diversity, I'm like, what does that mean? Like, what do you mean? We need to be able to name it and say it, that it means that we need a visible representation. Great, visible representation. What do we need? We need more Black women. We would like to see more Black men, Hispanic women. We can get specific. And it's important to get really specific so that we have our drishti on what it is that we want to be able to see. Otherwise, it's like this vague concept of what it is. And while some may say, oh, well, that feels like it's very tokenism, et cetera, like, yes, it could feel that way. However, if our intention is aligned with creating impactful change, then it won't be tokenism. So when you see below the line, there's so many other different dimensions: geographical location, work background, native, socioeconomic status. So when I shared with you all of the different backgrounds about who I am, because I know when I get on the screen, who you see is visual, assumption is a female and Black. And there's so many more parts of myself, how I identify myself, other than the 4 dimensions on the top. Here's a stat for you. Within 7 seconds, we make 11 assumptions on individuals based on the top of that iceberg. How wild is that? So hear that again, within 7 seconds. So if I count to 7, you make 11 assumptions about someone based on what you see. Really powerful. That's where meditation comes in. That's where the practice of meditation comes in, where we help mitigate our bias because we move through our thoughts. And we'll discuss a little bit more about that. So really important that when we are looking at things, we make assumptions based on little information about an individual. So the conscious inclusion, it's really around the who. So who is it that we need? Who is it that that we're discussing? So a lot of times in yoga spaces, we do say that it's very white. Yes, it is very white. And we also need to diversify it by occupation and who's there, by gender, who is there as well. So getting really specific. What is inclusion? Anyone, what is inclusion?
More of a felt sense of belonging, I would say.
Yeah, very, very close. Really, it's close to that. And I like what you shared, which we're going to like distinguish between inclusion and belonging, because those get to be interchangeable. And so there is like a separation in that. And inclusion is leveraging those differences, right? It's really leveraging the differences in a way that increases contribution. So versus looking at the differences as bad or looking at the differences as all the same, we want to be able to leverage those differences to increase contribution, right? So this is a way in which sometimes it can be a little slippery slope in like being performative, but what we want to do is if someone has a different thinking style or a different approach than we do, we want to be able to interact with those who are different than ourselves so we can leverage it. And that's really what creates innovation and removes barriers. So it's really the what are we doing with the differences that we have that make a difference. So the who and the what, diversity and inclusion, diversity alone isn't enough. There must be inclusion so students can bring their unique experiences, preferences, and strengths without sacrificing the minimizing core aspects of their identity, background, or perspective. So you can have diversity and it's not inclusive. Something can also be inclusive and it could not be very diverse depending on who makes up in the room. So really, if you are not actively including, you may be unintentionally excluding others. Now, I want to put this in the space and I don't want to create a tangent about it. And I think it's really important to highlight, especially, this is me being brave here. Most of you are in the room are from Minnesota, and I'm not from here, and I've only lived here for 5 years, and I've like primarily lived on the East Coast as well. And when I moved here, I kept hearing about like the culture of it. And we as students and teachers of this practice really have to remove that as a barrier. The culture of like Minnesota nice, we're inclusive, but not exclusive, et cetera. Like really what we say, we atrophy. And in yoga spaces, I really do believe that quote unquote Minnesota way that we need to like lower the temperature on is really also one of the barriers in which diversifying of students and teachers in a studio. It's also the same within a workspace, because if we have to be active about including others and making them also feel like they belong. And belonging is a further step than in being inclusive. Inclusive is not being nice and kind. That's where it stops. Really, belongingness is the state of feeling belonging to a particular group. Like that's where you really feel like this is my community because I am seen and I am heard. when belongingness is present, then people feel like they're seen and that they are heard. It's really being wholly accepted for who you are. What is equity? So when we talk about equity, when we discuss equity, equity is accessible opportunities for teachers and students. It's the how. It's how we do it in order to, it's really the how how we create space for others to get access to the practices and teachings. And hold on 2 seconds. Hold on 2 seconds. Okay. All right. I needed to grab something that I forgot. So one of my favorite teachers that I love to follow is Michelle Cassandra Johnson. And something that she talks about in her book, Skill to Action. She's the author of Skill to Action. If you haven't read it, it's a really great book. And when I started my yoga teacher training 5 years ago, and I was a diversity and inclusion leader, and I really started thinking about what's the intersection? There is a huge intersection to the concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the philosophy and the whole science around yoga. And it's not being discussed. And when I would go into when I was at my studio, my teacher at the time shared, she's like, well, I don't see color. We know like this practice is like, we're all one together. And I was like, oh, well, you can't say that. You can't say we don't see color. I was like, shared her name, and I was like, what color is the shirt that I'm wearing? And she shared, and I was like, well, you do see color by not right. It's like, okay, by not seeing the difference, we can't be more inclusive. We can't create that wholeness of belonging. And in Michelle Cassandra Johnson's book, she wrote, let's see. An unspoken assumption was made that each one of us in each training was having the same experience of the training and the same experience of the current political and cultural context. My race was made invisible. I was encouraged to rest in the absolute truth of we are one instead of holding the nuance that we are one, and yet we do not live or move from a place of oneness. Positivity culture was stressed as a way of bypassing the reality that oppression is at the root of why we suffer. I longed for yoga trainings that were focused on embodiment as a response to the oppression that was present both inside and outside of each yoga training I participated in. I yearned for discussions about how yoga philosophy could be the roadmap for creating social change. And in that statement, tears filled my eyes, because when we talk about diversity, we are one, and yet her color, when she says was not recognized, inclusion, what it is that she yearned for, being able to speak her voice, and yet at the same time, that not being part of her experience. And then also that the yoga philosophy really being the pathway to creating a social and just world, which is really around equity. And that is about bringing your full and whole self into a space as an individual. And I can share with you from my personal experience, I can go into a studio, it may feel diverse, it may feel like it's inclusive, people are nice, and I can tell if it's a place where I'd belong. Have any of you ever had that experience yourself?
Definitely.
Yeah. So can you feel the difference between inclusive and belongingness? Yeah. So as teachers and as students, and particularly residents of the state, given the old normative cultural norm of Minnesota, we have to disrupt that in order to get to the part of belonging. Right? I mean, when I moved here, everyone was like, yeah, they're nice to you, and you'll never get invited to people's houses. You'll never get invited to do that. I'm like, that is so strange. And I'm from the Midwest, and that is not something that is said. So that part of belonging, it's a breakthrough. Belonging is the one that we really have to intentionally focus on because it takes it a step further than inclusion. And that's how we create spaces. So when we say, and I will think about the region, when we say it's not inclusive and it's very white, we have to ask ourselves, do people feel that they belong? And it's a really great hypothesis for me to really think about. Maybe that's why the spaces aren't as diverse as what they look like. And when I speak about diverse, I do think non-white and from gender ability standpoint. It's the belongingness that we really need to emphasize and the equity. So, yep.
So this is Shelley, and this might not be what you're gonna get into right now, but at some point, I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's also female and Black, and actually my boss. And she was talking to me about yoga sanctuary, and just as a side note, she said, but sometimes she feels like she doesn't practice yoga, so just that's a given. So she already doesn't necessarily want to do it. But she had said, it almost feels like in the inclusivity or the desire for that it felt to her that there was this sense that Black people couldn't create their own space for yoga. And I don't know how that fits in with you or if you've had any of those feelings, but just something that I've been curious about since you do practice yoga and you're a teacher in the space and also do this work.
Yeah, I actually was just having this discussion yesterday with Marjorie. And we it's a both and, right? So there is a need for yoga spaces for a group that you identify with, right? So Black, Asian, Hispanic, et cetera, there is like the shared thing. It's an and, we don't have to make it an either or, and it also can be integrated. I, for myself, love to go into a space where I don't feel like I'm the only one. I want it to be integrated. And then really what I also appreciate are also spaces where there are other Black individual people that I can also hear the experiences, learn and grow more in that way, and have this level of comfort where I don't feel like I'm the only one, right? And I think that it's like, and it doesn't need to necessarily be that it's because it's Black, like that is what's there. But when you do look at the state and the region and the diversity of the region, that's typically where the pockets might fall and where the segregation may happen. So it's a both and we have to be able to hold space for the both and, because that is also necessary, right? It's no different than like if you were to break it out in gender, like women's topics or LGBTQ topics or pronoun, having groups around shared dimension is also really powerful as well. And not looking at it as a way as something that's segregated, it's looking at something that is support and also how can we integrate it more, the integration. That would be my response, Shelley. Okay, so equity. So here we have right here, belongingness, diversity, and inclusion, when those three things are happen, we really begin focusing on equity, where we can begin removing the barriers. And with equity, some of you may see this, some of you may have not seen this. I really love this image where the reality is on the side. When I think about yoga, the reality is most of the images, social media, it's white, abled female bodies. The reality is that we focus on asana. The reality is that we like all of those things that really stack and create barriers for someone to may feel like they are not part of the practice. When we remove some of those things, equality looks like you're creating all of the things. So on social media, it could look like, tokenism, like after every 3 posts, I have to have a person of color or whatever the case is. And that's equality. That's not what we're also aiming for. And that equity is, and this is where people get a little defensive about equity. They feel like equity is where it looks like you're taking away something to give to the other person. However, what you can see in this photo is that person is shorter, and the person who is taller does already have that resource of being taller. So we don't need to give that individual a box, and we can give the box to the individual that is shorter. And that is equity. And that's where people get defensive in this of, why do I have to give up something in order to help someone else? Well, you already have the access to it. You can already see the game because you're tall by default. So, so let's create spaces for more individuals. The last one is really liberation, which the barrier, as you can see, the barrier is the fence. And in Skill and Action, it's described by Octavia Rahim. She says the promise of yoga is freedom. Freedom is both an individual and collective journey. Our liberation is tied to one another, and so is our yoga practice. So as teachers, we want to create the end. We want to create liberation. And liberation is disrupting the barriers when it comes to social norms, right? Social norms, cultural norms, like, okay, here's this studio, they practice this studio, they do this. In Minnesota, we are this way. Like yoga teachers, when I hear yoga teachers say that, I'm like, well, that is kind of a form of harm because it is exclusive of others. So let's practice this and speak our truth on who and how we want to be. Liberate that as a barrier, right? Looking at equitable pricing, scaling pricing for yoga communities. Those are all of the things that we have control in order to create liberation and access to this practice so that people can transform and heal. And the more people are transforming and healing, the more we can as a collective nation and society and as beings. Let me pause and see if there's any questions. Have any of you, this I know has been thrown around a lot in this space lately. Any questions on this, or have any of you seen this before or in a different way?
I've seen it, definitely. I like the way that you described the boxes for equity. I haven't heard it discussed that way. So, yes, the tall man has a box, but we can give that box. Well, no, it's what you said takes away what I'm thinking. Like, he's already got everything he needs. If he has that box, he doesn't need more of those boxes. Give them to the shorter guy. And the way you described it was really effective, and I'm not articulating it back the way that you said it, but I really appreciate it, Ericka.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've never seen that with the reality side.
Yeah, that's the other thing that's missing.
And I think that's really powerful because a lot of people want to deny the reality as it exists, and that there are people with significantly more privilege and want to deny that fact. So I thought that was really powerful as it moves left to right.
Yeah. And something that you shared about that is that what I love in this image, especially on the reality, you can only see the feet, so you don't know who the person is. There's privilege. What I started getting really cringy about, especially in 2020, was talking about privilege as if individuals of color didn't have privilege. And I understand that there are different privileges, and everyone has privileges at some point, right? Depending, so you could apply this scenario to a private school or whatever the case it is, and really recognizing that what you said is sometimes, like, it's not about taking away, it's about creating a playing field, removing the barriers so that people can access it wherever they're at. So this is a really great image when people are like, well, I worked really hard for this, so I deserve it. Yeah, you did. And all we're doing is saying we need to give resources to the individuals that don't have the same access. Yeah. All right.
The way that you're talking about that right now too is to not get locked into some idea of who is privileged and who isn't, and to stay nimble. And that feels like another place for the mindfulness to kick in, to really be aware of what the situation is here. Look at the reality as opposed to some already idea in your head.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another kind of bias.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's, I think about, and there's different sections of privilege. When I think about like myself, my parents have been married for 41 years. I went to school, went to university, grew up, in the Midwest, middle class. Like, here are these things that are still privileges that I have, that I still have to leverage. It creates accountability for all. So really what it does is it recognizes where we're at on the social construct, like closer to the center of power, right? Who has more access, who has more resources and access to you be an agent for leveraging power, right? That's really what I look at it for, versus like privilege. The way that I heard it was being shared in a way as if it was like oppressed, which was really cringy to me. So anyhow, okay, so I'm going to share this. Let me make sure this works. And we're going to do an exercise. Can you all see my screen? Okay. So in this video, she's going to have us like go through, it's an 11-minute video. So she's going to have us go through some arm exercises just so you're prepared, and we'll do that together. Okay.
I have good news and bad news. Good news is, after watching this talk, you can download a certificate making you an official ally, acting in solidarity with marginalized groups of people. Bad news is, that's not true. Allyship isn't an identity you can obtain like a Costco membership. It's a lifelong journey, and it must begin in the body. I learned this in 2017 during a speech by Black playwright Donna Michelle St. Bernard, where she encouraged white folks to look behind them, to see who trailed them because of the space they occupied artistically, economically, socially. I sat behind a white man with his hands behind his head, leaning back so he was inches from my face, and he rigorously nodded to show he was progressive. Exasperated, I stage whispered, "Move your arms. We can't see. Look behind you." And he sat up, lowered his arms, and continued to nod at Donna Michelle's speech. This moment taught me that allyship means nothing if it doesn't start from the body. Embodied allyship means believing with your whole body that each of us deserve to live and love equally, and to live those beliefs everywhere from conversations to organizational structures to government policies. My name is Catherine Hernandez, and I'm a writer. After surviving abuse from a theater institution where my stories as a brown woman were devalued and dismissed, I committed to decolonizing my practice. For over 2 decades, I have worked to empower marginalized artists to trust their ability to tell their truth in a world that focuses on white, able-bodied, heterosexual lives. To foster their safety, I also create a world in which they are held with respect. And that means I have to wade through countless difficult conversations to encourage sincere and sustainable change. And that's far from easy for any of us. Let's try an experiment. If you've witnessed a racialized person being harassed and you didn't intervene, pat your head. If a disabled person called you out on not including them and you denied your responsibility, feel the weight of your elbow in your hand. If you witnessed the Black Lives Matter protests and you did nothing, feel your hands on your belly. If you were too uncomfortable to follow any of these instructions, try blinking your eyes. What sensations are you feeling right now? Yeah, these are real and by design in ways that may seem insignificant. White supremacy affects our bodies in substantial ways. It teaches people from birth to disconnect from their bodies and from the painful truth around them. Some lives are valued more than others. When I have these conversations with privileged people, I see a range of reactions, a reddening of the face, like, been found out, a tightening of the lips, like, not me. I need facts, prove my privilege to me. Disassociation. I'm just gonna tune out until this brown lady goes away. And crying, feel sorry for me. Those knee-jerk reactions are an opportunity for true change. Civil unrest is the price we pay for superficial relationship building. True allyship is a combination of critical analysis and body awareness. But what would it take to get people to embody allyship? This was a question I explored while writing my second novel. It's about racialized, queer, trans, disabled, and elderly folks learning to take arms against a fascist regime. In a context where these people are put into workhouses after environmental and financial devastation, it was difficult to imagine how allies could change the tide. I was inspired by my partner, Nazba Tom. As a generative somatics practitioner, Nazba teaches gestures and movements that help people improve their relationships to others and to heal from trauma. Movements are practiced regularly to help people do things such as communicate and set boundaries. And I thought, can people practice movements to learn allyship? I imagined allies doing movements while speaking the following creed. When I do not act, I am complicit. When I know wrong is happening, I act. When the oppressed tell me I am wrong, I open my heart and change. When change is led by the
We've lost the audio.
supremacy is instilled in us daily, any counter practice would have to also be daily, much like committing to a practice of yoga or binge watching a TV show. To begin your daily practice of allyship, let's wake up our bodies. Let's consider the first two lines of the allyship creed. When I do not act, I am complicit. When I know wrong is happening, I act. Almost a year ago, I saw 4 cop cars surround one unarmed Black woman. They handcuffed her over a traffic violation. I felt frozen, in denial. To move past this, I had to repeat the lines from the creed over and over again. I was witnessing police brutality. I wish I could tell you that I immediately intervened, but I grew up surrounded by anti-Black sentiments. I was taught that we were the better brown people because we were hardworking. I had to fight through the shame in my chest and the stiffness in my arms to record the altercation on my phone. Recognizing what I felt in my body is what helped me center this woman's safety. Let's do a gesture that embodies these first two lines. When I do not act, I am complicit. When I know wrong is happening, I act. Let's remember the sensation of embarrassment and shame it creates in our bodies. It's not a fraction as shameful as being oppressed. Moving on to the next line. When the oppressed tell me I am wrong, I open my heart and change. It takes humility to be checked on our privilege. Who taught us that our opinions, our actions, our presence is more important than others? Let's do a gesture that embodies the line. When the oppressed tell me I'm wrong, I open my heart and change. Let's remember the sensation of being wrong. It's a fraction of the shame you feel when you are silenced, forgotten by history. Moving on to the next line. When change is led by the oppressed, I move aside and uplift. In an effort to cover our shame, we may take up space in social justice movements by performing rather than embodying allyship, showcasing our charity, crying, talking over oppressed people. What is the cost of our invisibility in those movements? Let's do a gesture that embodies that line. When change is led by the oppressed, I move aside and uplift. It may feel empty, passing energy to others, but it's a fraction of what oppressed people feel when their identities, their labor are stolen. Let's do all the movements while saying the creed. Are you ready? When I do not act, I am complicit. When I know wrong is happening, I act. When the oppressed tell me I am wrong, I open my heart and change. When change is led by the oppressed, I move aside and uplift. Good. You are a feeling human being. You have the ability to stop performing and start acting, to believe with your whole body that each of us deserve to live and love equally. Let's practice these movements every day. Let's use these movements to create revolutions in our interactions, both big and small.
All right, any reactions to the video? And how that ties into
And
ally.
having really, really strong reactions. I just can't say, I can't articulate what they are. From the beginning of the video to the end was a complete 180-degree shift. From like how I was feeling inwardly to feeling, yeah, understanding more so what an ally is, you know, the kind of a definition for that. And then just feeling expansive. That's the word I feel.
Mm.
Yeah. And a little more connected.
Yeah. I really like that video, particularly, you know, as practitioners, teachers of this, is really thinking about how allyship is connected to the body. And we feel that in our body, in the body sensations. We feel when we are not doing anything, we notice it in our breath, we notice it in our body. And that's something that's really important to bring awareness to. And again, how this practice is connected in so many ways. We can feel allyship in our body. So moving with that, as a teacher, really thinking yourself of as an ally, this practice, which this whole practice, when you look at Bhagavad Gita, it's all about having a skill in action. And it's the book that Michelle Cassandra Johnson wrote as well, A Skill in Action. The philosophy of yoga teaches us to move into action to be more of an active ally. So an active ally, you don't have to like take all of these notes down. I'll go through because there's a lot of things. You can do the 3 categories, which are a skeptic, neutral observer, or champion. And the skeptic, they don't get it. They don't believe diversity and inclusion exists. I don't have the privilege. To me, it is a lack of awareness in the body and really recognizing where the body, like recognizing, not having that recognition. Next is neutral observer. It's the individuals in the middle. They get it. However, they may not know what to do. They don't feel like they have a responsibility. So that's what keeps individuals as a neutral observer. Doesn't act because everyone appears to be calm. So it's like everyone's calm, open-minded, passive. So not yet expanding energy and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And also, I also like to think of this as it's not happening to me. It's not in my backyard. So I'm not going to pay attention to it, even though I know it's the wrong thing. And thinking of the body sensations, like where does that happen? If I see something and I know, and if I see something and I don't do something about it, I can feel it in my belly. Like I feel it right there. And I know that if I'm getting ready to do something, if I see something and I'm getting ready to act and do something, I feel it in my chest. Because there is this way of me leading from the heart and having it be really disruptive and tapping in to my intention in that way. So the champion, which is an active ally, like I believe it's my responsibility to take action, consistently change their own behavior, comfortable, challenging, exclusionary behavior, integrates DEI into their work. So a lot of this is like very heart focused and active focused because you move freely from that space without needing to really think about it. An active ally moves moves consciously from insight into action. And we can move consciously insight into action when we are aware of our body sensations, right? We know what to do in the space that it's safe, obviously, for yourself. Ways ally shows up. So there's 6 different ways an ally shows up. An upstander, confidant, advocate, champion, a mentorship, and an amplifier. As an upstander, they act as an opposite of a bystander. So it's someone who sees the wrongdoing and acts to combat jokes. A confidant can create space for an individual, listening to their stories. An advocate recognizes the omission and they really look for who's missing and being an advocate to create more inclusive circles. A champion seeks to learn as much as possible about the challenges and prejudices. A mentor and sponsor, you can mentor and sponsor someone. And an amplifier, they works to ensure represented groups are heard. So out of those 6 ways, those are 6 ways that you can show up. So the impact of stepping out of your comfort zone. Allyship requires you to step out of your comfort zone. That's where the magic happens. The impact of stepping out of your comfort zone and creating inclusion and being an active ally is I feel seen, I see myself, I feel welcome, I can do this, I belong here, and someone has my back, right? So I'm gonna go back to the screen. And I want you to take a couple minutes I'll go back to the 6 ways an ally show up. And I want you to reflect on one way that you can show up as an ally out of the 6 that are shared. Oops. So I'll bring those up. What's one way that you can show up as an ally? So take a couple minutes to journal on that. All right. Who wants to share a way that you will show up as an ally and how you can? Who wants to share?
I can share.
Yeah.
The one that felt most natural to me was confidant, and that's something in one of my previous jobs that I feel like I kind of already did when I was more one-on-one with some of my coworkers, and just being able to create space to listen to someone, and they would open up and just listen and not be giving feedback per se, but just listening to what they had to say and just supporting where they were at with it. And it seemed to be pretty impactful to them at that point. So that's something that feels natural to me to just be there and listen and create a safe space for someone to speak.
Yeah. Great. Who else?
I can read
Another
more
one.
and educate myself more, and just having more knowledge to be able to articulate to circles that I'm a part of, where like I just think of certain family members, that aren't going to be reading things and maybe misinformed about certain things.
Yeah. So then that's for you, right? For yourself, to educate for yourself so that you can use that to be an ally. So then the ally goes into action. So then how do you use that information that you educate yourself to move into action? So which one of those 6 ways can you be that for another person?
So would that be like the champion?
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then how do you use that as a champion? So you listen, speak, research, as you said. Because where I want to go a little bit deeper on that, where I'm going with this is it's really great that we like absorb the information for ourselves so that we are that in that way. And then how do we use it to actually be in action? So there's a both and, right? So because the more that we ingest the information, yes, we get to be better stewards of this. We can be more responsible with our language. And what I also want to ensure is that we're using it to be in action.
So I have like, as you were talking about that, is, maybe bring it into yoga class, right? Bring it into a Dharma talk in some way, weave it into.
Yes.
Some of our, the yamas and niyamas, do them through that lens of the things that we're learning and researching and understanding about ourselves.
I love that, like bringing it into a Dharma talk, into class. Yeah, that would be really, really powerful, because something that I think we spend a lot of time on, especially as our society culture, is we have this desire to have all the knowledge, right? And how we transfer and use that knowledge. And that's the part that I really want, that I was emphasizing there in that. Yeah.
The other thing I thought of was like family members you mentioned, right? Like using what we're learning, and I think it was the first box on the screen, right? Like calling it out when you see it and saying, based on this learning, or however you say it to your family.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really great. All right. So speaking of yamas and yamas, we're coming up. So the last part of our time, we're going to speak about the yamas and yamas and how they correlate to being a skill in action. Now, did you all go through the yamas and yamas in your training?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So based on time always flies. I won't go in depth and make the assumption, obviously, you know what they are. So we'll like dive into the questions. So starting with the Ahimsa, who wants to read this on here, the definition? And let me share with you, the evolution of these definitions were inspired by Michelle Cassandra Johnson. And we'll do some inquiry questions as well that came from the inspiration of her book too.
I can read. Do you want me to read the full definition?
Yeah.
Ahimsa, non-violence, non-harming through actions, thoughts, and words. Ahimsa is the absence of injustice, violence, and cruelty. This includes actions, words, and ways of living. Ahimsa means always behaving in a way that takes into account if a behavior is causing harm or injustice.
Great. So let's take some time to journal in this space. We'll do the first question. Where do you recognize violence through your thoughts, thought patterns, words, or actions? So take a couple of minutes to go through that. And actually, this is what we'll do. I'll go through all the questions and you can pick a question that resonates with you and then journal on that question. The second one is, how has your cultural conditioning led you to act in violent ways? What is one step you can take to interrupt, disrupt, or intervene when you notice injustice occurring to yourself or others? What might repair look like when you have caused harm to someone or a group of beings? And then how would you create conditions for repair and respond in an undefeated way? So pick a question that resonates with you the most and take a couple of minutes to journal on that. You can use your paper that you were given. All right. So I'm not going to use a Menti here, but what are some words or phrases that we often use in yoga that can exclude others? So let's call out some words. What are some words that we often use that can be exclusive of others?
Using the Sanskrit without actually articulating what we're asking people to do.
So does that exclude others? So like, what are some words that can exclude that? I would say that's like a cultural appropriation, right? Or so what are some words that we could use, like the words that we say maybe in cueing or in language that may exclude other people?
Anything gender specific would be an example, like, I don't know if, saying you guys, or when there's both males and females in the room.
Yeah. Yeah. So saying you guys when there's male and females in the room, what else?
Thinking of it. Like,
Well, I'm thinking like, when you say touch your toes, like you just assume everyone can, like I can't. So maybe there's ableism there, or somehow assumptions. Probably not
Well,
nice.
I think that, touching your toes is fine, right? Because there can be some that can. So I think it's like touch your toes, and a part in this like of excluding others is ensuring that we are giving variations to other people. Bend your knees, right? Because if we take out all of the things, we are also then disabling it for those who can't. So we don't ever know what the assumption is. So if one person can touch their toes and one's not, let's find the middle ground and say hands to toes, and give other ways of being able to do that. Or the aim, like it's, action, body part, destination. That is the destination, touching your toes. People get that, or it's like your fingertips to your toes, so that there's other various ways as well. Exclusive language is, it also could be, I'll share an experience. I was in a week-long program, a yoga program, and the teacher, I didn't hear this because I don't know where I was. I wasn't present in the practice. And the teacher said, press your hands down in the mat like you're white knuckling the mat. And it was a room, and it was like 20 other Black teachers that were in there. And the next day, the teacher shared with the leader of this program, because it was a guest teacher, and the teacher said, press your hands down in the mat like you're white knuckling it. My fingers don't turn white. So thinking about the cues that, or like, don't breathe so you're not red in the face or blue in the face, or whatever the case is. Like I've heard that a couple of times. Or ponytail to the back of the room, like that's speaking to gender or someone that may have hair. Like those are those are cues that can really be exclusive. When we're focusing specifically on the body part, then we're able to give variations around that. Is that clear?
Yeah. Shockingly so.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Okay. Let's think about how we can shift our language to be more inclusive. What are some ways that we can be inclusive with our language? What are some ways?
For sure.
Can you repeat that?
Providing options.
Options. Yeah, I love that you said options, because to me, like, modifications has a negative connotation to it. So options really helps, it gives different options for it. It's not then it's less than or not.
Using concrete words, concrete examples, or not even examples, but body parts, like, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Just being very concrete about where you're putting something, what you're doing with what.
Yeah, yeah. So you're saying being concrete, and yeah, absolutely. Other ways that we can be inclusive is like talking about props and bringing props into, speaking in the relationship around props. Like that is something that is also really powerful as well, because individuals look at props as something that's hindering. We can also say rest when you need, like in the pose, versus like powering through a practice. What was that?
I said, like, listening to your body, seeing how this feels in your body, and choosing another pose if it's not working, being kind of invitational.
Yeah, invitational. Yes, I really love that. Like really being like creating it as an invitation, because we want to create this powerness and fullness for individuals. Every time I teach and I can take a person to another level than what their mind is, like the invitation, do this. Like, for example, wheel to or flip dog into wheel. A lot of people can't think that they can do it, and that I've seen and which I've taught. And when I give them the invitation to try, everyone is so shocked that so many people, the ones that I've done it, most of the people are shocked, like, whoa, I can do this and I can fall on the mat and it looks silly and it's still okay, and giving that invitation to them allows them to be part of it and feel like they can do it. All right, the next one. Satya. Who wants to read this one?
Satya, truthfulness. Satya means to speak the truth. Dominant culture perpetuates the belief that there is one narrative. Moving beyond the idea that only one truth exists allows us to create a space for dialogue, authenticity, learning, opening, and understanding.
Yeah. So the questions for Satya. How have you noticed dominant culture perpetuating the idea that there's only one truth? How have you contributed to the behavior in your life? What would support you in practice of being with multiple truths and perspectives? What happens physically, emotionally, and mentally and spiritually when you aren't speaking the truth and instead acting from a place of inauthenticity? And last, why seeking the truth? Why seeking truth is such an important practice during these times? So pick one of those questions. Journal on that. All right. Moving along to Astea. Who wants to take that one?
Astea, non-stealing, not taking more than you need or more than is freely offered. Astea is about non-stealing or taking anything that doesn't belong to us, but its focus goes beyond material possessions. Astea looks at all levels of our being. Capitalism perpetuates the idea that more is better, that bigger is better, and that there is greater value attached to possessing more capital. Astea challenges us to be mindful in our choices about what we consume, take, need, and desire.
So here are some questions to reflect and journal on Astea. Where might you be taking more than you need, from who and from how? So think about that in the relationship to the practice or practice of yoga. And what drives you to take more than you need? And what is the impact of taking more than you need on yourself, others, and the planet? And how does your social location, so when you think about the resources and that you have, how might that intersect with the reason you might be taking more than you need? So when you think back to that equity photo, so the guy that was standing on the box, definitely taking more than needed. Okay. Next one. Let's take this one. Aparigraha.
Parigraha builds our non-possessiveness, non-grasping, letting go of attachment. Parigraha builds on the intent of asteya. It encourages one to assess unhealthy attachments, negative thinking, old belief patterns, fears, and desires. Dominant culture thrives because of a belief in scarcity. Parigraha invites one to believe in abundance.
All right. And the journaling questions on these: what has dominant culture taught you about attachment and non-attachment? What messages did you receive from your family about letting go? And how does your social location, so think about, again, the resources that you have, affect your ability to practice aparigraha? So one area in this, when I think about this one, and he's also a steya, is when it comes to spiritual bypassing. And spiritual bypassing, the addiction to spiritual practice as a way of avoiding unresolved emotions. So that attachment to not processing feelings that are not good, and bypassing that. There's this attachment of spiritually bypassing and psychological wounds and unfinished developed tasks. So thinking about that, that's like something that comes up for me when we talk about spiritual bypassing or positive toxicity, where we are focused so much on the positive outcome of the practice and not realizing that the practice is also leveraged in a way to help us move through some of the most difficult feelings that we may have as well. Brahmacharya, who wants to read this one?
I can read it.
Yeah.
non-excess energy management, managing extremes, cravings, specifically sexual energy. Brahmacharya is composed of two parts. The first is the root kar, which means to move. The second, Brahma, which means truth. Brahmacharya is the movement toward essential truth, the truth that we are divine beings and our journey is meant to be one in which we walk in God's consciousness. To walk in God's consciousness, we must withdraw our senses, manage our energy, and try to find balance through something other than giving into our cravings.
Yeah. When I think about this one, I was talking with some friends last night about this. I think of power and like the guru, where there's so much in teachers that we are like, oh, they're the guru. And guru is like, it's an inappropriate way of really describing and how we as the teacher in the seat of teacher really use our power and the practice of weaponizing and that managing the energy of that really, right? And so really being able to know, that's what I think of part of it is, and then the last one is like really the truth of this and balancing and giving into those cravings of when we are teaching, the cravings of feedback that we get from people or what we hear from people, managing the energy of that and almost like that orgasmic feeling when we do have that as well. So some of the questions for this is, what cravings do you currently have that make it difficult for you to walk in God's consciousness? And really what I, also in a presence with this is that this practice is a spiritual teaching. So I know that from a secular standpoint, God may not be the source for yourself, and it is referenced in so much of the practice. And so interpret that as you need. How do you inhabit space? How much space do you feel entitled to take up, right? So how are you creating space for other differences to make the difference? And how might the way you use your energy and manage your sense affect others, especially in situations where you hold the privilege? So take one of those questions and journal on that. All right. And then lastly, like really reflecting, how can you leverage the yamas to create a more inclusive and equitable practice? All right. So we're going to move through the last few minutes that we have here together, the niyamas, which we know the niyamas are practices for our own self. and how we really leverage this practice for ourselves to how we, by practicing the niyamas for ourselves, it creates better agent for us to be a more active ally and moving us into action. Who wants to take Saucha?
Purification, cleanliness in body, mind, and emotions. Saucha means cleanliness. The yoga asanas and pranayama are essential means through which we can attend to inner and outer saucha.
Amazing. So purification, cleanliness. When I think about this, I think about the body sensations again. Once again, the things that we hold in order for us to move through those body sensations so that we get really clear intent to make impact. So when you think about the questions here, what practice can you engage to support you in both noticing the impact of cultural conditioning on yourself and clearing out thoughts and perspectives that may be causing harm? So when you think of the total practice, like the asana, for me, meditation has been one of the biggest practices to bring in quiet, to welcome in stillness. Another form of the practice is journaling and really being in Dharma talks around this is that way for me to help bring out the purification. And what is required of us as a culture to truly purify toxic belief systems and patterns? So pick one of those questions and journal on that. All right. And Santosha, who wants to take this one?
I can. Santosha is contentment. Santosha is the practice of acceptance. When one is clear about the truth of the moment, they can ask themselves what is within their power to make necessary changes for the greater good.
So in these questions here, when you are unable to practice contentment and therefore unable to find inner peace, what is the outward impact, right? So what's the outward impact on you to others and how that may cause an exclusionary environment? So when I think about like our nervous system, right? When my nervous system is not settled, my intent and impact do not match. I have the right intent, the impact is opposite. My bias may show up, right? I may say something that is exclusive. And so that practice of contentment for myself and for others. And then how can we both how can you both be content with what is while not becoming complacent? So when you think about like anti-racism, social justice, like we can be content in what is, but still keep and not have it be complicit or complacent with it, really continuing to be that skill and action. and allowing what is to persist instead of considering and working for what ought to be. From the practice of being with what is truly occurring around you and in our culture, what is within your power to make necessary changes for the greater good? As a teacher, as a student of this practice, what is your power to change, to make necessary changes for the greater good in this practice? All right, the next one, tapas. Who wants to take this one?
Self-discipline, will, passion, perseverance, heat in the practice. Tapas is one of the most powerful concepts in the Yoga Sutras. The word tapas comes from the Sanskrit verb tap, which means to burn. The traditional interpretation of tapas is fiery discipline. To create a just world, one needs perseverance and passion to generate new ways of being.
Great, so tapas, what sets your heart on fire as you engage in the practice of creating a just world? What minimizes your passion or fire to create new or more liberatory ways of being? And what fuels your passion and fire as you strive to create new and more liberatory ways of being? All right, next. Svadhyaya. Who wants to take on this one?
Svadhyaya, self-study, absorbing spiritual wisdom, non-judgmental self-observation. Svadhyaya is the practice of self-reflection. This practice allows one to see themselves more clearly and to connect with the divine within, which will allow them to see the divine spark that exists in all beings.
So I really love this one when we talked about in the book that we are one, yet we're not all having the same experience. And really that self-reflection, when we're able to see that within ourselves. And I loved that part of it, where we're able to see ourselves as individuals and different and still part of collective and one. So the questions here, why is it important to raise consciousness about systems of dominance, power, and oppression? Why is it important to raise that? And then what feels important about inner work as we try to create a more just world, create outer change. So doing that work internally, like we said about reading books, educating ourselves, what triggers or grabs you the most when you are in conversations about power and oppression with people who share some of your same identities? What is your default behavior when you experience being emotionally or mentally triggered or grabbed? And then what would ground you or allow you to feel resourced in moments when you are working across differences and you feel triggered or grabbed? So pick one of those questions that resonates. Oops. All right, so really thinking about our circle of influence, I am going to list a series of questions, and thinking about our self-study really is around like our social circles and what we can do to disrupt our social circle, what we can do to incorporate more diversity around our social circles, particularly like really looking at, is it homogeneous? Does it look like me? And how can I expand my circle? So that self-study and inquiry. I'm going to read a series of questions, and you are going to draw a circle if the individual identifies as you. And what I mean by this is by race. A star if the individual does not identify as you. So a circle if they identify as you, a star if they don't, and a triangle if they are diverse. So with a piece of paper, grab a piece of paper and then draw a circle and then write me in the middle of that circle. And then you're going to draw those shapes out and around your circle according to the statements. So the first statement is, who are your closest friends are. So if they most identify as you, you're going to make a circle. If they don't, you're going to make a star. If it's a mix, you're going to draw a triangle. My neighbors in my neighborhood are predominantly. My doctor is or doctors are. The students I practice with are. My yoga teachers are. During a day, the people with whom I come into contact are predominantly. The books I predominantly read are. And yoga teachers that or yoga books that I read, the authors are predominantly. And then the last, if you use social media, the teachers that I follow are predominantly. Okay. So what is it that you noticed about your circle? Who wants to share?
I actually struggled to put it in a circle, so I just took the list and put the.
Oh, yeah, or the circle. What I mean by that is like a circle of influence, your influence, yeah.
Ah, got it, okay, so I could go back and put them on, think with that context. For me personally, I see a mix of triangles and circles and one star. I guess, so, and one kind of question mark, I'm not sure who the authors of some of my yoga books are. I need to go look. I mean, honestly, it's a.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Who else?
One of the things I noticed is a lack of stars. You know, I have one maybe star, which says a good place for me to grow is looking for some way of having impact, having influence on me that from people that don't look like me. Or
yeah,
it's definitely growth.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's the whole goal of this activity, right? When we're self-studying, a lot of times we go through our day, we go through life, and we're so conditioned to seeing the same thing that when we actually pause, write it down, look at it, journal about it, we can see like, wow, there's an opportunity for me to grow in this area. So it's not about making us good or bad. It's like, let's really pause, reflect, and do this self-inquiry so that we know where we need to be more expansive. And really, that's what I think about this niyama is really slowing down so that we can see how intentional we can be.
Like I noticed there's a lot of them that are mixed, but how different would it be to intentionally look for a perspective that's totally different than mine?
Yeah, that's really great. Thank you for sharing that. And then the last niyama. Who wants to take that one?
Surrender to God or spirit, offering the fruits of your actions up to something greater. Ishvara. Do you know how to pronounce it? Pranidhana. Thank you.
Yeah.
Means to surrender to a higher source, to lay all your actions at the feet of God or the divine. In moving closer to the divine, one is able to work toward a higher purpose, focused on the oneness of all beings.
Yeah. There's that goal, right? Like the focus on one of all beings. And when we focus on all beings, that means we see all beings for who they are, not for who, like we see them through their lens, not through our lens, right? So how is your higher purpose related to creating a just world? And how might the practice of laying your actions at the feet of God, the divine, allow you to move closer to recognizing your own divinity and divinity within others? All right. So switching gears a little bit, these questions, there's so many opportunities to dive deeper within them. And like I said, they were inspired by, and some of the questions are right from Michelle Cassandra Johnson, and really thinking about the yamas and niyamas, that ethics, the two pillars, the two limbs, as a way of how we begin to look at the future to create a more just, equitable, and inclusive and belonging studio and for this practice. So when you're thinking about plans for inclusion, you as a teacher graduating for your teacher training, what's the responsibility for you to carry these yoga ethics and understanding those definitions to create an inclusive, diverse, and more equitable studio where all feel that they belong? That is our role and our responsibility. We have the ability to be an agent and a vessel for people to really liberate themselves from themselves. And that's what this practice is all about. So let me pause and see if there's any questions.
I'll just say Ericka is a very, very, very good person to ask. If you have a lingering thought, a lingering wondering, she is a really brave, safe person. So I'll encourage that.
Well, one lingering thought for me is like where a studio is located definitely has an impact on inclusion, because it will be physically located in a particular neighborhood. And therefore, people have different abilities to get to that location.
Yeah. So in that case, I mean, I understand that is like the reality, right? Like that. And so it is about the innovation on how to get the practice outside of also of those four walls through community classes and location, et cetera. That's something that's really important as well, that we have to think of it beyond, and it could be Zoom, like here we are virtually in Zoom, and that has definitely created more equity as well.
Ericka, I'm curious about, you worked on a lot of big brands, and so you're oftentimes, I imagine, talking about visual marketing in that, and talking about marketing a yoga space, or talking about a yoga space for a new student. It can be the visuals, using diverse visuals is one piece of it, but I'm curious about your experience or any advice you have about making sure that people from maybe diverse backgrounds that aren't as visually easily accessed, and a piece of marketing material, make sure that they feel included in that space, that they know it's a safe space for them, just from how you talk about your studio.
Yeah, I think that it's also assuring that you're diversifying how you're sharing the practice. Like not all of it needs to be poses, right? Like not all of it needs to be asana poses. It can be about the yoga, about the yamas and niyamas. It can be about meditation. So it can be more of the content. It doesn't always necessarily need to be visual images of people. It can be words. It can have what the, like a yama santosha, and like discussing that. So I think it could be mixed messaging in the marketing as well.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, if any question, yeah.
I just kind of along with that question from Chelsea. I guess how do you think about the corporatization of yoga and how that has kind of impacted a homogenous view of yoga, and how that can be leveraged in a way, I guess, because it's not going away, and how it can be more accessible to people of different incomes, different physical abilities, different, I don't know, just a much more diverse group of people, because I think there is a huge income disparity in how yoga is accessible in the mainstream.
Yeah, I mean, so what I'll share too, I mean, we do live in a capitalistic society. Yoga is $1 billion industry, and I think there's pros and cons to it. I think that options like Zoom, et cetera, are readily available. When I think about the income of yoga, that puts me on the whole other edge of like, yoga is a piece of the puzzle of so many other issues as well. Like look at gas prices, look at, like, let's really talk about equity as a whole system of what people get access to. And there's some studios that do some really creative things where the studio that I teach at, like there's a membership and you can also add on to your membership, like an X percentage of dollars that go into a fund that can help support those who are financially impacted. So I think that there is a responsibility of that. And that's where it's like, we can be content and not holding on to complacency, and being really innovative and speaking to other studios on how to make the practice more equitable in cost, donate, and also really thinking about a lot of these trainings are expensive for teachers. So I do understand that there is a cost in order to pay the teachers equitably as well. And that's what also drives the prices of class a little bit, but there needs to be a mixed portfolio of studios where there is a range of different classes and programs for people to access it in that way.
Where do you teach, Michelle? Ericka.
Oh, that's funny. My middle name is Michelle, so I was getting ready to respond anyway. I teach at Up Yoga, and if you all think of any other questions, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram. That's where I am the most. And Shelly knows how to get a hold of me. You're all invited to the launch party if you want to come. It's at Up Yoga at April 12th, so then we can meet in person. And I'm really grateful for you, Shelly, for really grateful for you for allowing me to come. And I'm really grateful for my teachers and mentors that have helped me develop and deepen my spiritual practice and allow the intersection of this to come about.
Thank you so much, Ericka. As you prepare to leave, I just want to give you a big thank you. And also I'm just struck with how you really live these principles. And I'm tired, so I feel emotional about all kinds of things, but you really live it. And I think that you embody that welcoming presence. I know when I'm with you that I'm safe and that I truly am welcome. And I hope that we can all have those ripple effects in our lives as teachers and as humans to continue that, and then to continue to grow and stretch our edges to work toward more diversity, more equity, more inclusivity. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you all so much, and drive back safely and enjoy the rest of your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Feel better too.
Yeah.
Alarming.
Yay. So
It's not perfectly.